So time for the third and last Swift pill. And for this one, we're going to talk about a topic that every Swift developer knows and loves. It's optionals. So I'm sure you've already written that kind of code where you have an object that is optional. So here it's date. And then you have some other objects like formatter to transform the optional value, and a label, which is an outlet where you're going to set the result of the transformation. And when you want to transform an optional, you need to write code like this. You need to do what is called a conditional binding using the if-let syntax. And yeah, still the glitch. But basically, what I want to say is that when you think about it, we just want to transform a value, and we need to write kind of a lot of code. We need to write a control structure with the if. We need to declare a variable. Usually, this variable has a name that doesn't make like a lot of information. It's the same name than the optional variable. We had safe sometime, but that's boilerplate code, and basically we don't like to write boilerplate code. So could there be a way for us to have a shorter, swiftier syntax? So to do it, we're going to do something a little bit crazy. We're going to look at the documentation for optional. So I don't know if you remember what Daniel said this morning, but he said that map does not only exist for arrays, it exists for a whole lot of types, and optional is one of those types where map is defined. So if we look at it, we can see that there is a generic instance method called map on the optional type, and what it does is that it's going to evaluate a closure when the optional instance is not nil, and it's going to pass the unwrapped value as the input of the closure. So if we look at the code, because it's a little bit clearer, we can see that the signature is very close to what we have with arrays. We give map a closure to transform a value, and what it's going to do is that if there is an actual value in the optional, it's going to apply the transform and return the result, and if the optional is nil, it's just going to return nil and not apply the transformation, which makes sense. And now, with this map, we can actually rewrite our transformation. We can do date.map. Inside the map, we give it a closure. It's a closure that uses the formatter and feeds as the input to the formatter the $0, so the argument of the closure. It's a much shorter syntax. We could actually even omit the return keyword, as it's not mandatory in Swift. We could also pass directly the function in a point-free style, and this way we are achieving the same functionality than we were with the if-let syntax, but this time it's much shorter, and maybe it's a little bit more idiomatic, because when we have map, we can identify that we are doing a transform. It's very clear, whereas when we had the if-let, it could have been a transform. We could also have just consumed the value. It's a little bit less clear, so I think it can be a nice improvement to our code. And speaking of nice improvement, let's keep on going and talk about the second one. So in Swift, we often have functions that are really cool. They do really nice things, but they have one defect, is that they do not work with optionals. They expect an actual instance to be passed as an argument. And sometimes it's kind of annoying because there are lots of objects, for instance, objects that come from UIKit or Foundation that have optional APIs because they are Objective-C implementation under the hood. I'm thinking, for instance, about UI label. The property text is an optional string, so if we want to use the text of the label with our cool function, we need to add this little syntax. So we need to provide the default value using the nil coalescing operator. And I don't know about you, but when I see that in code, it's kind of like a code smell. It makes you a little bit sad because you're thinking, maybe I could improve on it a little bit. So we're going to do it. What we are going to do is that we are going to define an extension on optional when the wrap value is a string. And we're going to define a computed property called orEmpty, and inside it's going to be pretty straightforward. We're going to switch on self, because remember, optional is just an enum. And for the case where there is an actual value within the optional, we just return the value. When there is no value, we return the empty string. And this way, now we have a code that looks much nicer. It doesn't feel like a code smell, and we can be really happy with our code. So I hope you've liked these two short tips. I'll see you tomorrow for a much longer talk about property-based testing, and enjoy the rest of the show.